but I grew up with my grandparents, and I did not know why that happened until I was about 30 or 35. Looking back on that time, I realized that not knowing why I was not with my parents created this baseline insecurity that was really difficult to deal with. The positive aspect of that was it kind of it forced kind of this self-awareness, or awareness of my lack of awareness is really what it was. Who am I? Why am I here? And my inability to answer that question made me aware that you, and everybody have a basic inability to see ourselves how we actually are, or how we actually represent to other people, at least. So when I think about myself, I see three people. I see the self that I imagine myself to be. I see the self that I wish I was, and that's where I spend most of my time, to be honest with you. And then there's the self that you see and everybody else sees, who see the physical, how I act, how I walk, how I talk, and how that adds up, how you interpret that as me as a person. And I've always been curious about that third person. I've always wanted to just like take a time out, exit, go be somebody else for a while, and just see who I looked like to other people. And I think that acceptance that you cannot really see yourself is the first and most important part. Because with that baseline acceptance, when I communicate, I assume, instead of assuming that I'm being understood, I assume that, or I'm aware rather, that there's boundaries between what my brain is thinking and what the words are coming out that has a potential failure points. Then those words go through the air and land in your ears, and then you interpret them, and then you understand that interpretation. There's 3 or 4 or 5 barriers to the idea that's in my head getting into your head correctly. And that awareness enables that. So that helps, right, to improve communication.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
All right, what's up, EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast and YouTube listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here with a high-speed, low-drag, air-cooled, belt-fed, Teflon-coated classmate of mine who I think both of us were actually running and gunning for the top spot at West Point. And
the highest number?
because of our academic prowess. And now Justin is legit a NASA. He's actually leading a team of NASA engineers, and we've been friends for literally in school and ever since then. So for over 2 decades now, we've been homies, and he's an incredible guy. And I'm really excited for you all to get a chance to hear from him and glean some insights from him. He's been very, very successful, and he's very real and very transparent. And I'm just, again, excited for you guys to get a chance to hear from Justin. So Big J Cream, what's up?
No. Do you realize how badly I beat you out in the competition for the highest rank? I was like ninth from the bottom.
That's awesome.
Like 980 something.
Hey, I wasn't too far away, brother. I tell people when they say, dude, you went to West Point, right? They get all excited, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I went to West Point, right? And I kind of bust out my chest and get my little West Point swag on, right?
That's right.
My West Point swag. And then I say this, I'm like, dude, I graduated at the bottom of my class.
Yeah.
So, yeah, bro. And then I say, yeah, I had a 4.0 there. I'm like, you had a 4.0 at West Point? I said, yeah. If you add up all 4 years, bro, I'd be right there.
Yeah, man. My oldest boy is a like capital A, type A, double type A personality. And he's like, oh, I got an A minus, you know? And I'm like, oh, I got an A minus once.
Hey, I had lots of fantastics, bro. Lots of fantastics. No, one of our classmates, Aaron, I don't know if you remember Aaron Lindstrom, and
yeah, sure.
he we go check out our grades together, right? At the, after the term, right?
You start at opposite ends of the room, right?
Oh, dude. And I'm like, I'm all excited. I'm doing the Toyota kick in the air, you know what I mean? The old Toyota, kick in the air and stuff. And he's all bummed out, and I love big A-Lance, big Aaron. And I'm like, Aaron, dude, what'd you get, bro? He's like, man, I got a 98%, right? And I'm like, I've never even seen a 98, bro, at West Point, right? And he's like, well, how'd you do? Why are you so excited? I'm like, bro, I got a 68, man.
Yeah, right. Yes. Don't have to do that again.
That's right.
I am a go.
That's
yes,
right.
Sir.
What did you major in at school?
Mechanical engineering, which makes perfect sense for my, academic prowess.
Dude, that's incredible, man. Mine was graduation. So
yeah, I shortly after we started taking courses focused on our major, I started thinking about my logic. And I tried, but I was just like, this is what I like. Like, I can't imagine doing something like earth sciences or what have you. That this is my jam. So I don't know. We'll just give it a try. So thankfully, the honest truth is, I found out a few years ago I've got dyslexia, and not the kind where I can't read, but the kind where it's just slow, and learning stuff. I just learn differently than typical, and definitely differently than West Point taught. I hope they still aren't doing it, but they're like the experts in the rote learning method, right? And that was not very effective for me. So I finally just resolved that I had, that they gave us, we had class, and then they told us, right, every class period comes with 2 hours of homework generally. I got nothing out of homework, zero. I mean, I could sit there for 4 hours reading it and doing it and just go to the bathroom and come back, and I had no idea what happened. So I decided that when I got in class, I was just going to kill it in the classroom and ask a lot of questions and take crazy notes. And because that was all I had, that 45 or 50 minutes to get it done. And thankfully, in all 8 of my academic boards, my professors were like, this guy, the grades don't show up, but he's on top of it. So it was a little stressful, but thankfully they had enough wisdom to put that human element into the system. So the positive, though, is I didn't, without realizing, I was training myself to put in extra effort to learn stuff. And when I do learn stuff, I learn it really good, because it's hard to get in, but it's hard to get out. So
right. No, that's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
So And as I'm sure we're going to talk about, the other aspects of intelligence are as or more important than tacit knowledge that you've got on a specific subject, right? Because
Right.
ultimately, like in my field today of engineering, a smart engineer is kind of a calculator, or you know what I mean? We get the right answer out of them, but without the ability to communicate the answer, lead a complex team, it's not a lot of value, right? Because the people are what execute even the engineering, right? They solve the problems, they build the prototypes, they figure out how to manufacture things. So it was a real gift, actually, to be in that state of failure for so long, because I just don't care about the risk of failure. Let's do it. Like, tell me, I don't understand. Help me understand. Whatever it is, right? Show me how this works. Have you? And then that's just been the greatest gift of the whole situation, which was traumatic.
Oh, sure. No, I mean, talk about. I mean, you mentioned, kind of stressful, man. I mean, it was. I mean, that was my first dose of seriously intense, focused anxiety for 4 years. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Where and then one of my lifting partners, he was one of those just naturally brilliant dudes, like legit brilliant dudes. He never studied. I mean, never studied. And like, I can't even wrap my being around not being able to not having to study at West Point, for me anyway. And he'd go in and still like 95%, 98%, and crush it. And so and I also love what you said about being in that failure state. Something that we do in our family is, because we've been entrepreneurs for so long, 20 plus years, over 10 different startups and stuff, is we celebrate failure in our house. Because in academia and in the American education system, an F is a bad thing. Oh man, you're grounded until you get your grades up, or all these different connotations, right? That go along with these with an F. And as an entrepreneur, that's I call, in our house, we call it professor failure. That is our learning tool. That's just another learning tool. I want to, for our daughter, if she wants to have a job at some point, that's fine. But I want her to think like an entrepreneur, and have a positive view and frame of reference for failure. Because how
yeah,
many people does failure paralyze? I mean, literally
yeah, yeah,
paralyze, right? And
yeah,
so I love what you said. Being in that state, it reframed failure to you, is what it
yeah.
sounds like, to help you become successful
Well,
engineer.
if you can imagine, I was failing most of my classes most of the time, and in that environment for everyone else, your whole world is established by your class rank, and that was pretty difficult to face up to that all the time. And then really, of course, when finals came around, and especially I can remember the last semester before graduation, I think it was advanced thermodynamics or something crazy. And I had an F in the class, and I would, without passing that class, I was not going to graduate. And trying to study when you have an F, and you haven't passed anything in the course up to that point, and trying to motivate yourself to study for those finals were huge, right? Huge, difficult and long. That really was an I would say emotional, intellectual challenge, to put that aside, that certain doom aside, and just do what you need to do. And so it worked.
Well, and that's another excellent point, Justin. The emotional intelligence that it took you to be able to operate in that space. And I'm going to make a parallel. It's not, obviously, not a direct correlation, but it's like combat, from an academic standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're going into academic combat and you have to tune out, be aware of it. So not like, oh, hey, I'm in Candyland and I shouldn't be aware of any threats. No, so you're aware, you're self-aware, and you got to manage yourself now, self-management piece, other aspect of emotional intelligence, and really focus on performing and executing versus allowing the emotions and the stress to own you and control you.
Correct.
And it may shut you down. It may, those kind of extreme situations lead people to do different things based on our emotional intelligence and childhoods and all kinds of things there.
Correct. Yeah, I'd say I never thought of it before, but I think the combat analogy is very good, because that situation in particular, and pretty much anything where you're facing something that you've never done before, or no one's ever done before, or you have failed at repeatedly, is similar to a combat situation where it looks like doom. It's like certain death. However, if you surrender to that certain death, it's going to become certain death. If you try, there's the possibility that you will live, right? So really, what are your choices? And that's kind of was my approach. It's a lot simpler when it's study or not study. I've got an F going into the final. If I say, well, it's hopeless and don't study, well, I'm going to get an F on the final, and I'm not going to pass the class for sure. If I go back to the book one more time and try one more time, at least maybe I have a chance to pass the test and pass the class.
No, that's awesome. Absolutely love that.
But thankfully, from this perspective that we're talking about EQ, I'm becoming more and more impressed about how the academy provided that path for EQ. Because what happened to me in that case is when you fail a class, or when your GPA drops below the low limit for a semester, you have an academic board, and that board consists of all your professors, the tactical officer who's in charge of you legally, and any other officer who's officially associated with you. I don't know if they convened or they just called them and asked their opinion, but they gathered the opinion of all these people associated with you and say, hey, what should be the fate of this cadet? Should he continue on, or should he should we send him home? I had at least 3. I had 8. I literally had 8 academic boards out of 8. And I had at least 3 where the results from the academic board were that if you fail one more class, you're out of here, no questions asked. And I had a few more after that. But what happened is those professors recognized they could see me literally, and they could override whatever was happening. Well, I know now what was happening. It was a learning disability, but they were able to override how that manifested into the black and white numerical representation.
No, and so here's what's interesting. So that's the pro is that they were socially aware enough to implement social management strategies.
Yep.
Right. So the people side of it, what's interesting, so maybe, I don't know if it's a con, I would say it was probably a con, is that there wasn't anything in the system that made any of them think, all these very smart people, man, maybe something's up with the way Justin is learning, right? Maybe there's something, so it would be interesting to see if there are any systems in place to find the future Justins that are going through an institution like that and say, no, dude, it's not that you're dumb or you're a failure in these. No, it's okay. You learn like this, and so now let's adjust fire this way, and then it's like, oh my gosh, this guy's crushing everything.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, imagine if you had discovered that when you were a freshman, dude, how would your 4 years have been different? Right?
Yeah.
You'd be top of the class, right?
Yeah.
So, no, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately that's kind of how my life has resulted is, I mean, in that point where I described, where I decided that no matter how hard I tried, I wasn't getting a lot of value out of that 2 hours of self-study. So I was going to concentrate on my classroom time. That decision right there changed my perspective forever, and that's how I have approached life. So now, where there's in the real world, if you will, there's more of a balance between social expertise and technical expertise. Um, that means that it's a lot easier. I'm a lot more valuable to my organizations because I I I can figure out how to learn what I need to learn, and then we move on to the subject of getting the word out, getting the teams coordinated, getting the feedback, getting the accountability, building the team, um, addressing people's personal issues as they might impact, right? And so it's been adventurous. It's been a lot of adventure.
Well, again, Justin, huge, again, EQ point, self-awareness to be like, okay, this is ineffective in my life. This is much more effective. So
Yeah.
now, like you said, I mean, that to say, I mean, talk about a defining moment in your life
Yeah.
with how you can learn more effectively. I think that is arguably one of the most important life skills that
Yeah.
anyone could ever learn is how you learn
Yeah.
and how to learn more effectively. Because learning is a part of anything you do, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you're going to
Correct.
do in life,
Yeah.
NASA engineer, astronaut, janitor, anything,
Yeah.
learning how you learn is
And the key to it is accepting your weaknesses. Um, one thing, for example, I think everybody has trouble with memory depending on the circumstances, right? Um, I never count on being able to remember something. I always plan that I am going to forget. So that in that way, in accepting that, I create systems so I don't depend on having remembered, and therefore I never forget. It's always there, or it's waiting for me when I go searching for this thing I need to do. Oh, I left it right here where it's needed, or what have you, or to-do lists. I keep close all the time. Um, but it's just simply accepting the limitations that you have. Everyone has them, right? Some are different than others, and not allowing the social norms that have been constructed to tell you that you're okay or not okay because your limitations are different than someone else's, or because your strengths are different than someone else's as well. And you can't do your strengths if you're focused on your weaknesses and how uh, um, inadequate you are because of those. That's just a lie, right? I mean, no, but let's look at let's look at where I am, for goodness sakes, right? I mean, I'm at Johnson Space Center. I've got 150 people. I'm in charge of 10 buildings of Johnson Space Center, like 30 something test facilities. And I barely passed my engineering classes, right? How does that happen? It's because the gauge wasn't correct. And right. And I'm surprised. Okay, let me not not lie to you. I'm super pleased, and this is unexpected, based on the feedback that I've gotten over the years about, hey, you know, how can you be an engineer when you suck at arithmetic? Well, well, or that's like telling a writer you're a bad writer because you're a bad speller. Don't believe it, right? Your strengths are your strengths, and your uniqueness is your path.
wow. That let me write that down. I'm taking notes here. That's why if you see me typing, that's what I'm doing. That is super powerful, man. And the thing is, like you've mentioned a number of times, it takes self-awareness to figure out your uniqueness. I have asked for years, I have asked so many different people, what are your strengths? And it's, hey, well, I like tacos, you know what I mean? Right? Or, you know what I mean? And many people are not self-aware, or due to some insecurities or low self-image or self-condemnation issues, it's tough to see through all of that. Or maybe the self-fulfilling prophecy stuff where, oh, well, Justin, clearly you got F's at West Point, so you're a dumb guy. Well, no, actually, that's not the case. That's not an accurate story, from other people. No, I'm actually brilliant. I learn differently than you do. So, like you said, the gauge is not accurate based on how you learn and how, that kind of thing. And so, so that self-awareness piece is so huge.
Yeah,
so let's back up a little bit, Justin.
Tell me.
How did and I love that. That was great. It didn't, the direction that took was, I love that, where we went there. Because again, failure is huge. Self-awareness is so huge. How did you start your emotional growth journey? And maybe how did your childhood impact positively or negatively your emotional growth journey? So for me, I'm going to give you one example real quick before, just to kind of maybe help out. So my childhood, and I love my parents. I share the story a lot. So this is not a knock on my parents. In my household, we grew up in a household where we yelled and screamed at each other, and whoever yelled the loudest won. And then we would stomp off into respective corners of the house, and 30 minutes, an hour later, we'd come back and literally act like nothing happened. Like no exaggeration, my entire childhood. So what did I learn through that? I learned how to stuff and avoid my emotions. So that's going to be my next books, right? If you want to learn how to stuff and avoid your emotions, right? Here's a 5-part series on how to do that, which, probably as you know now, and as I know, studying EQ for a few years now, that's very, very unhealthy.
Yeah.
Because pain and bitterness that's not transformed will be transferred. So when you stuff and avoid, it doesn't go away. Yeah. That stuff will come out at some point. So anyway, that's an example of how my childhood negatively, in this case, impacted my emotional growth journey. Do you have any similar stories of positive or negative for you and your emotional growth journey, not just from your childhood, but then walk that out for us throughout your professional life as well?
Yeah. So the challenge is not answering the question. The challenge is answering the question without breaking down and crying. Let me help you, though, before I answer that question. I think that every topic of EQ or self-awareness has two sides. You just told me your weakness, which is a tendency to stuff and avoid. The positive, and the other side of that is the potential awareness and control. That if you're in a situation in which the emotions would be overwhelming, you are able to say, I see you coming, emotions, not right now. I got to save someone's life, right? And we'll come back. So it's really just the perpetual or the continual stuffing and avoiding that's a problem. And I'm sure you can look back in your life and see that not allowing emotions to overwhelm you or run you is also a positive. So that would be a strength, right? Just watch out for the weakness. And the same thing in all areas of EQ. For example, and I am going to answer your question. I just had an EQ test from a leadership consultant. And one of my high points was that I am not easily stressed. I can deal with a whole lot of uncertainty without getting overly emotional. And his comment to me, it was one of my highest scores. So his comment to me was, you need to watch out for that one. I'm like, what? That was my best score. What you talking about? He said, because that is you have an unusually high score on that. So you need to remember that almost everyone around you is not equally able to deal with the level of stress that you're comfortable with. And you're going to be overwhelming everyone around you if you don't manage that. Right? So my example is the converse of the example that you unwittingly provided. Um, is is it? But it shows that there's two sides of every topic, just about, and
No,
one and
that's fascinating. But what's super fascinating too is knowing how you developed that. You had 4 years in a laboratory of stress and anxiety,
yeah,
and you had to manage it.
yeah.
And so, talk about seeing the connection between, today and 20 plus years ago, and how that is playing out in your
Yeah,
professional life.
yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, very. So my journey began, I would say, at my beginning, and it all started back in March 1974. I won't go back that far, but I grew up with my grandparents, um, and I did not know why that happened until I was about 30 or 35. And now, looking back on that time, I realized that not knowing why I was not with my parents created this baseline insecurity that was really difficult to deal with. The positive aspect of that was it kind of caused me, it forced kind of this self awareness, or awareness of my lack of awareness, is really what it was. Who am I? Why am I here? And my inability to answer that question um, made me aware that you, and everybody have a basic inability to see ourselves how we actually are, or how we actually represent to other people, at least. So when I think about myself, I see three people. I see the self that I imagine myself to be. I see the self that I wish I was, and that's where I spend most of my time, to be honest with you. And then there's the self that you see and everybody else sees, who see the physical, how I act, how I walk, how I talk, and how that adds up, how you interpret that as me as a person. Um, and I've always been curious about that third person. I've always wanted to just like take a time out, exit, go be somebody else for a while, and just see who I looked like to other people. And I think that acceptance that you cannot really see yourself is the first and most important part. Because what if with that baseline acceptance, when I communicate, I assume, instead of assuming that I'm being understood, I assume that, or I'm aware rather, that there's boundaries between what my brain is thinking and what the words are coming out that has a potential failure points. Then those words go through the air and land in your ears, and then you interpret them, and then you understand that interpretation. There's 3 or 4 or 5 barriers to the idea that's in my head getting into your head correctly, and that awareness enables that. So that helps, right, with to improve communication, for one, right, or at least helps me, or would help one who has thought about that, to say, okay, I'm going to teach this class, or I want to communicate this idea. Where is the person coming from? Or if I'm teaching a class, who is my audience? Are they college kids, or are they grizzly oil field senior management, grizzly, salty? Who are they? Are they stay-home moms? Are they professional athletes? And that helps. Then, I mean, everybody who does any kind of speaking or teaching will think about that, because it helps them formulate their deliveries to increase the chance of understanding. That's all EQ, right? There's 18 EQ steps in there that can happen more or less automatically. I don't know if I answered the question now.
Well, I know you absolutely did, from a high level, but if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of go into a little bit more depth.
Yeah, tell me.
And I love that whole, I mean, I love what you said about you see yourself from, kind of you see three different people when you're kind of looking at yourself there. And I love that the acceptance that all of us have a blind spot, we, even for those of us that are maybe super self-aware, there's still, and I'm not one of those, by the way, even those people, there's still, it's not the full picture. It's still not the full picture. And so just having that baseline acceptance that, okay, I have maybe this idea of myself. Oh, here's a perfect example. So that made me think of, have you ever read the book, Leadership and Self-Deception?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually used to hand it out in my leadership classes.
Right?
That's a great one.
Right?
Getting out of the box.
You know what I mean? And in this one company, 10,000 executives, 90% of the 10,000 executives rated themselves in the top 5%.
Yeah.
Right? So, and you would think that, okay, baller executives, you probably have a pretty good idea of, kind of where you're at in the world and self-awareness. Clearly not. And so anyway, okay, I want to touch on, if you're comfortable, and we don't have to, so I want you to feel comfortable and safe and stuff. What was the impact on you, either in the past or even today, on having that tough, very difficult question that you had to ask yourself? Why was I raised by my grandparents? Like what impact did that, when you said that kind of left me with a baseline insecurity? I just know, and here's kind of why I want to dig into this a little bit more, just again, whatever your comfort level is, the impact through which my very deep insecurities have played in every area of my life.
Yeah, sure.
My marriage, my parenting, my professional life, the businesses that we've owned and ran and all that stuff. My insecurities have been, it's been, I don't maybe say devastating, but maybe maybe not devastating, but let me say it's had a very direct impact. So how have you dealt with that? So what's been the impact, but then how have you dealt with that? What have you done to deal with that and cope with that and work through that?
Yeah, I bet you when I answer this question, you'll find similarities to yourself. So, firstly, I sought to define that I was okay. And all right, I was in conflict with that. Not, at the age of 10, 15, 18, 25 even, I probably was not aware, I'm pretty certainly was not aware of the root of that baseline insecurity. It just was, and probably lots of people are, right? To varying degrees, and we don't have a way to know how much I am versus what you were or someone else was. But what it caused me to do was to seek achievement in any way that I could. And I could not achieve academically in the environment, in the 80s and early 90s, which was still pretty antiquated teaching methods, right? Of here, memorize this, and whoever memorizes the best wins. So I did other stuff. I started running. I mean, they kind of made all of us try out in junior high school because the place was so small, and they're like, we don't care, we need runners, everybody run, and we're going to take the top of you. And turned out I was really good at it. So I started running and I started winning, and that was a great thing. And that led into other endurance sports like mountain biking. I love to be in the woods and with nature. And for me, getting on a mountain bike, I could go further and faster in the exploration, right? It was like hiking originally, but I could go 5 times as far in the same amount of time. So, and then coming to West Point, just the opportunity was, the opportunity was irresistible that I could be counted in the top of Americans. I didn't believe that. It actually hadn't crossed my mind. But I did pretty good, ironically, on my ACT, which and so West Point sent me a recruiting brochure, and on the back of that one at the time had a profile of graduating firsties. So many were team captains, so many were president of their class, so many were Eagle Scouts, so many, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, I could do this. Holy cow. And so that opportunity became irresistible. And many things did, like going into the infantry, which is not the easy way through your time in the Army, right? I always seem to respond to the most challenging situation. And I think that was my attempt to validate myself that I am okay. And I am, I was just trying to be okay is how that manifested. So that was a huge impact. Interpersonally, I think like you, I was a huge people pleaser. I mean, that was literally my path to success as growing up, because I probably unconsciously at the time had this fear that whatever caused me to be here in this weird, out of place, if I didn't act right, was going to send me back or send me to some other situation, right? So that was a huge impact, and probably what drove my desire to understand how I was representing myself to other people, right? So that I could control it and I could manage it and I could be successful at it so that I wasn't rejected. And as you probably experience, when you drive that hard at it, you end up like subverting yourself, right? You kind of, if a relationship is like a two-person team sport, and if you're hogging the ball all the time, or vice versa, you're like, no, you shoot, no, you have the ball all the time, that the other person can't play. They get the, it doesn't work out nearly as well. And that strains all relationships when you're doing all the work, or you're in your insecurity, requiring the other person to validate you all the time, right? How I got out of that, was that part of the question? Man, how did I get out of that? Failing a lot of relationships, failing a lot professionally. I mean, I guess fortunately, I was so driven to achieve, to validate myself, that I went at everything 100%. And you know me well. Everybody who knows me well is like, wow, you got a lot going on. You're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this, you're doing that. Like you like snowboarding, you like mountain biking, you like motorcycles, you like cars, you like art, you like movies, you like music. You want to hang out with people, you want to achieve in your career. What are you doing, right? It's too much for anybody. So that was a path, and I lost my place about where I was going with this.
How did you?
Oh, how did I get out of this? Right. Yeah. Failing a lot. So I was going 100% at whatever it was. Right. So when we look at my resume, for example, which I get feedback is impressive. To me, that resume represents 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20. Every positive thing on there, there's 10, 20 things underneath it that did not succeed, were a failure. But I just was so determined that I kept going at it, or changing, or trying something different. And that, it adds up. It's kind of a numbers game, really, to find the right opportunity and environment and team that can allow you to be successful. But eventually that failure gets to you, right? Eventually, no matter how many times if they are, people aren't very good about telling you that they appreciate you or they admire you. Eventually, as we all do, you focus more on the failures and the shortcomings, and it gets to you. And same as my example of studying for finals, you got to decide: am I going to believe that failure is failure and guarantee that it's failure, or am I going to try anyway and hope that I can turn some success out of what's going on here? And eventually something happens. Eventually something happens. But the failure, to me, each failure sort of tempered my personality, if you will, especially with relationships. There's there is a necessity to become comfortable with yourself. If you're not comfortable with yourself, if you are uncomfortable, you make other people uncomfortable. And when other people are uncomfortable with you, it disrupts the trust they have with you. And then they do not promote you. They do not want to get to know you, et cetera, et cetera. So it was in that vein that I had this very painful and gradual realization that this belief that I was not okay, or this wondering, I'm getting a lot of feedback that I'm not good enough. Is that true, or am I just not understood? Eventually, you just give up caring. You just give up caring, and unfortunately, for me, that took most of my life, and I'm of course will continue to work on it. But where I am today, that I'm really proud of, is I just don't care. I just don't care. I know that I have a peculiar and unique experience from West Point and the Army and the oil industry and growing up and doing endurance sports and working on cars and motorcycles, and all of those experiences that's exposed me to, and I can share that, right? One of the cool things for me that's been life changing, it's been frustrating also, but coming out of the West Point and Army environment, where they're very purposeful about developing leadership, creating some constraints around it so we can talk about it and improve it. Going out into the civilian world, where there's none of that, I felt like I had been given this gift by being allowed to go through that. I tell people, I've taught some leadership development for several years. I always tell people in that class that my education, which was kind of immersive, was exactly immersive, right? Was a gift from the United States, from the United States taxpayers, right? And I feel compelled to try my best to give some of that back to you, because you haven't had, no one in the civilian world has that same level of commitment to your development, because no other civilian or corporation can afford to put someone through 4 or 5 or 6 years of 24/7 immersive training before you get your first job, right? So let me try to give you something, give you some of that, and that's often not that well. I'm sure you've experienced it well. Is that that can be perceived that you think you're super awesome and the other person is not super awesome, and let me help you. But there have been a few environments where folks are like, "Yeah, that is amazing. Please tell me," and so that's really rewarding for me also.
Okay, again, you nailed a bunch of topics that I would love to jump into more deeply. let me man, yeah, let me start with this one. So you mentioned something that I I'm not sure how many people are actually in this place or space, and that is being comfortable with themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a huge thing.
Right? And again, maybe my social awareness is not was not where it needs to be and stuff, but I think, man, so many people, bro, are walking around with these insecurities, regardless of the source. Yours came from a different spot than mine came from,
Yeah. Yeah.
but ultimately it plays out in it can play out in similar ways. And I think mine played out, in similar ways. Also, I became a high achiever, whatever that means, right? You know, high-ish achiever because I wanted to get Scooby snacks from people, right? I want to get shrug, like, oh man, right? So it didn't come from a healthy place necessarily. And so how does one, so in your leadership training you've done and your own leadership journey, how does one get comfortable with himself? How does
That's all? I just got to answer that question.
yeah, easy.
Oh, Justin Guru. It's the great paradox. It really is of humanity. I believe that in spite of how I feel like my life's difficulties and resulting insecurities are an extreme example, I bet that everybody has them. I bet even people who their life looks like it came straight out of a movie script are telling themselves that, man, even though my life looked like it was good and looked perfect, it was filled with struggle and stress and insecurity. And so the question, how do you become comfortable with yourself, is the question. Let me continue to babble while I try to try to sort that out. I mean, we see everywhere, especially on social media, inspiration venues, that your uniqueness is your power, right? And that's the ultimate truth, is that your failures are your uniqueness. Let's put it this way. Like I said, I struggle to remember things. Um, I have ADD also. Didn't feel like it was super important to mention that, but so I sometimes like working on a car, for example. I sometimes know I had a certain tool in my hand 35 seconds ago. I have no idea where that tool is. Right? Everyone has that experience to some degree, right? Um, so if accepting my weakness is remembering things, what do I do in the garage? I use a tool, I put it back where it goes. So a stranger coming into my garage is like, wow, you're super organized. That's impressive, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's not impressive. It's just what we do so that we can do it, period. It just has to happen. Or, someone asked me about something that they mentioned to me 3 weeks ago. I'm like, oh yeah, here it is on my checklist. Yeah, here's my status on that, because I don't dare leave it in my brain, because I know when people stop me in the hallway or whatever and ask me something, I could have already done it and I can't even remember having done it. And I'll say something like, I don't know what you're talking about. Did we talk about this already? And they walk away thinking that I am completely incompetent and they're concerned about the responsibilities they've allowed me to have, right? So I have a system, and that system, acknowledging my weakness, becomes my strength. I never forget anything because I never have to remember anything. It's all right here, right? In my cute little book. So accepting your weaknesses and adjusting to them will allow you to make them strengths in a different way. And that acceptance then allows eventually that insecurity about that weakness to atrophy, erode away eventually. And so, today, when we were kids in school, if someone made fun of how forgetful I was, I might have been offended. Might have got my feelings hurt. Today, I probably wouldn't even notice if someone said something like that, right? Or I might just laugh about it. And I think the path, while not easy, is simply accepting it, because what you resist persists. If you accept it, and work with it instead of fighting it, it becomes a strength, and you become comfortable. And eventually, you get old enough that you realize everybody's got problems, and all the things that you thought you were particularly a loser because of. Everyone's got a different list.
Yeah, that's right. I love that.
Yeah.
One thing I like to say is no one leaves their childhood unscathed.
Yeah.
Right.
That's weird,
Everybody,
right?
like, you know what I mean? Because we're all right. Another one I say all the time: hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by people.
Mhm.
So, and who leaves their childhood without some emotional injuries?
Right. Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we all have emotional injuries. Some of us have dealt with them. Folks like me have never dealt with them until later on in life. And the other thing I love is the whole accepting weaknesses can really become your strengths. One of the things I say is, actually, Kathy said this one: your greatest struggle can be your greatest victory,
Yeah.
or it will be your greatest excuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I love that. Embrace it. And okay, it's so funny, man. So many similarities. One of the things that your idea, the concept of accepting your weakness, and then, okay, what is my system to compensate? I've got a ton of those exact same things.
Yeah.
The whole remembering stuff, dude. I can look at a picture of me in the picture and not remember even what the scenario was, right?
Yeah.
And so one thing I do is I am a mad note taker, as you can see. I'm taking notes while you're talking. I'll be taking notes afterwards. I go back through and stuff. And so that concept of, well, hey, what'd you learn from Justin's talk or from the podcast episode with Justin? Let me pull it up and I'll tell you, right?
Yeah.
Tell you all my mad copious notes. And so, and I think that is such a powerful tool because we all have weaknesses. It's just, okay, what are some systems that we can put in place to now, will my, maybe will my memory be what, like my daughter, she's 13, and that kid, she's the human Post-it note. I don't know how she remembers half the stuff she remembers, but it's just whatever. It is what it is. And so will my memory ever be what her memory is? No, probably not. But that's okay, because I've got systems for myself, right? Strengths, the whole concept of Strengths Finder 2.0 and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what we do is we compare our weaknesses to your strengths.
Yeah.
Rattle off your list of accomplishments. I'm like, crap, I like tacos. You know what I mean? It's still like, I can't hang with all of Justin's accomplishments. It was funny, even, you're going through that. Like, why can't I just be happy with the strengths that I have? You know what I mean? So, I love that, Justin. I love that. So how does one become comfortable with himself is really, the concept of accepting and then working within the cards that we've been given. I'm not 6'8", and maybe if I wanted to play in the NBA, right? I'm not. I'm right. So working within the parameters that we have been given. And now here's something too, because I've seen some people do this, like, okay, well, and I'll use the specific analogy that you used is, well, I'm just not good at remembering. So don't complain when I forget all the time. Okay. Now, again, your greatest struggle will be your greatest victory or your biggest excuse.
Correct.
So like, okay, or I've seen this too. Well, okay, look, this is my personality mix, and whether you use Myers-Briggs or Personality Plus or DISC or whatever the thing is, the flavor is, well, that's just my personality, so deal with it. No, that's not the goal of understanding all this stuff about ourselves is not, I mean, yes, like you said, I love that. Acceptance is the first step, And then I think then the next step is what you said is like, okay, now work with that. How can you grow and improve? Not with the expectation that one day I will be 6'9" or 7 foot, because that's not a realistic expectation. But how can I work within the parameters that okay, I'm 6 foot, I'm 6'1", whatever. So now what can I do with that, so to speak? And I'm just using height as an example, whatever that dynamic is. So not use it as an excuse. So understanding not for, okay, yep, acceptance, and that's it. Okay, now what? Like, okay, now I need, so it's not that I'm super organized. It's just that I've created systems that I need to use based on my parameters that I've been given, so that I can work on cars, work on
Right.
that kind of thing. So
people accuse me all the time of being super organized. I'm like, no, I have a brain that changes channels all the time, right? All the time. I don't know how long I'm going to stay on a certain station before the next one comes or what the next one is. So I take a lot of notes so that when Days of Our Lives comes back, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember what was going on there.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm actually terribly organized, but I have to get stuff done. And it's frustrating and stressful to get stuck in recreating where I was when that channel changed. So you accept and you adapt and organize so that you can keep moving and not get hung up so badly. A really cool experience happened to me in the Army. My gunner, my right-hand man, was an incredible musician, incredible guitar player. The kind I can remember, I was hanging out with him one time, and we were watching TV, and his guitar was leaning against the couch there, and a commercial came on, and he reaches over with one hand and starts playing like a solo over top of the music with the commercial, just for fun. And he and I made a band when we were deployed, and I wrote a song, and he could not. I skipped a step. I am not like that. I am like strum, strummity, strum, right? And anyway, I wrote the song, and I was trying to like work it through with him, and he could not get it. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me! You are amazing. And he'd been playing like his whole life since he was like 4 or something like that. And he's like, no, man, that is hard. How do you do that? And that kind of stuck with me, is that what I was good at, which came naturally to me and was easy to me, was complex rhythms. And that was not easy for other people. And even though we can say that he is a much more accomplished guitar player than me, that doesn't say that my value is more or less different, right? And if I decided that, well, I'm not a good guitarist, so I'm not going to bring guitar stuff, I'm just going to like create a song and sort of put the outline together and give it to the real musicians and let them sort it out, how much different is that song going to turn out without the originator's input, right? How much less dynamic is it going to be because I took out my own strength, my own portion of the creativity, the creative process, because I didn't believe in myself. The reality is, if to change topics slightly but stay on sort of a musical analogy, if you think about a mega pop star of whatever your genre is, you don't like them because they're exactly the same as everybody else, right? And they don't dress like your brother-in-law, right? And they don't get up on stage and sort of sing like, I don't know if you guys are going to like this. In order to be successful, they have to like, bam, deliver, right? Loudly, put their whole self into it. There are some notes when you sing that you just have to go for it. You cannot sing at half volume because the note will not come. The physics of how your voice works. You cannot hold back, right? All of those subjects is that person deciding, in spite of their own insecurity, which probably led to the writing of the song they're singing. that they are going to give 100% of whatever the resulting good they have to give. And that's what makes it beautiful, right? So great. If you put arithmetic in front of me and a pencil and paper, we are not going to get to the end, guaranteed, without mistakes. So I'm a spreadsheet genius. I can do anything with spreadsheets, right? I can probably model the US government with a spreadsheet. Maybe. Because I don't trust myself with arithmetic, right? So I use a spreadsheet to make sure my arithmetic is correct. And even when I make a spreadsheet, I do it one way and then I do it the other way to double check and make sure both numbers are correct, because it's just not a thing that works that great with me, but it becomes a strength because I always have at my fingertips a way. Once I figure out the arithmetic, now I have a model that I can always go back to, and I can do something in a second and a half that might take, an hour to work out on paper. Right. Again, the beauty of it is your uniqueness, and your uniqueness is defined by your weaknesses as much as your strengths. And it's the fear that causes you to hold back your beauty from the world, right?
Man, Justin, so much money stuff. Absolutely love that. And I love your music analogy. That is so true. I've got, well, we're definitely going to have to do another episode, bro, because I haven't even scratched the surface of the thing I want to ask you. No smoke. What would be some either encouragement, advice, tips, suggestions, recommendations that you would pass along to leaders, influencers, business owners, executives, whatever, entrepreneurs that are wanting to take their emotional growth journey to the next level to be more effective in whatever capacity they're currently serving in?
No, well, this is like the third question in a row that only God knows the answer. So, this is it. This is all I got. Okay, so for leaders and entrepreneurs, kind of a little bit different topic. In many ways, I view, we didn't cover this, but I've also been an entrepreneur. I've been through 3 or 4 startups as well. One of which was super successful. Not surprisingly, not surprisingly, it was surprising. So in a lot of ways, being an entrepreneur is a subset of being a leader, right? Because you're getting out there and with a vision and impacting your world. In a lot of ways, being a leader is a subset of being an entrepreneur, because you've got a task ahead of you that you've got to organize: financial systems, sales systems, accounting systems, training systems, et cetera. And it takes leadership to get those things done successfully and to fulfill the vision you have. So in the area, in the middle of that Venn diagram, I will stick purely with the leadership and influencing other people. And that is, again, acceptance that you can't, of your limitations. That truly leadership is about trust, communication, and teamwork, right? And those 3 topics are simple, but they are impossible. They are, each of the 3 of them you can spend the rest of your lifetime trying to master, right? And thus leadership is something that can be simple, but takes a lifetime to master, like child rearing, or like being married. Like no matter how many times you go over the same topics, every time you're like, oh yeah, I did screw that up. Right? I did talk instead of listening. I did try to force them instead of collaborating with them. I didn't communicate my intent. I just threw out a task, So So my advice, I don't know how you stand me. These long answers. My advice to young leaders is to understand that you are a team member who has different responsibilities that exist outside the organization. And your job is to facilitate the team's success. And you do that by patiently establishing trust, creating communication, planning, right? Providing the assets needed by the team, and accepting that you're a student as well as they are, right? And accepting that you can't change people. You can help them change if they want to change, but you can't, as soon as you start forcing anything, that's an emergency procedure, right? Only. I'm sure you've had the same experience coming out of the Army into the civilian world. That I heard this so much. You don't know anything about leadership. You just said do something, and people did it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. That's true. Except this quote I heard a couple of times while I was an Army officer. It goes like this: "Fuck you, sir." Right? Can you believe that? Sure, I can force you. Sure, I can haul you off to jail, like when we're in the field or when we're deployed. But, not really. No. We have to work as a team, right? And we have to establish trust. You have to believe in me, and I have to trust you. Every aspect of leadership is a risk. If you're not doing it yourself, you have to trust some other person to do it. And take it from us, they might have to do it in a little bit different way than everybody expects that it be done. So, you have to be accepting that you're not going to get the best out of that person if you insist they do it a certain way, because you may be forcing them to work in their weakness. I like them apples.
I like those apples. No, that's excellent. That's excellent. Yeah, giving people the grace and the space and the patience to, and I would almost say, to create an environment that encourages growth, but like you said, doesn't force growth.
Yeah.
And doesn't, because I've done this wrong too, many, many times, is putting my expectations of what your leader development growth needs to look like.
Yeah.
And if it didn't look like what my expectation was, then I whatever the consequences are for not, for getting an F, right? And not realizing, no, Justin's genius. It's just he looks the Rubik's Cube differently than you.
I don't know if this is a valuable analogy you've got going on, but yeah. Justin's a genius.
No, absolutely. No,
so I tend to focus on the desired outcomes, right? And then of course you just can't wait to see if it works out, especially if we're talking about entrepreneurship. We can't just wait to see if we run out of money or make money, right? We have to have some stage gates. We have to have some benchmarks. So typically what I will do is we focus on the desired outcome that we want. Let's say you've got a subordinate, or let's say you've got a vice president of your organization who's in charge of training development. So I've got a lot of ideas about training development, but I'm the CEO, so I'm doing other things. So I want to delegate training development to you. So I could sit down with my training development guy and say, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that. But like we just said, I may be telling them how to suck the egg, right? And I may be forcing that person to work in their weakness, and therefore we don't get a good result. So instead, we focus on the desired outcome, which is that I want to bring a person into our organization, and 30 days later, I want them to be competent in these areas, right? I want them to be able to cold call a potential customer and get, contact information, get a follow-on appointment, or whatever your objectives are, right? Now, how are we going to make sure that actually happens without micromanaging? Is okay, we need that done in 3 months. So in a month from now, why don't you tell me how you're going to accomplish that, right? You come up with a plan, right? And show me how it's going to work. In 2 months, show me like a prototype process, right? Or show me your class materials or whatever you come up with. Let's be ready by 2 months from now to be able to put a test subject through the process and see if it seems like it's going to work, right? Same as we would do with software development or mechanical design, right? It's basically the same concept, but allowing that person to use their strengths and to use the beauty of their uniqueness to deliver to you the very best possible result. Because if we don't, we take away the potential. Like I can potentially use 100% of that person's brain power and 100% of their creativity to deliver the solution to a problem that we collectively have. If I start telling them how, I take away from that brain power and I take that they're applying, and I take away from the creativity that they're applying. Right? The risk is with all that leash that you give them, that they get tangled up in a tree or or something, right? And that's what you should manage, just to make sure that we're kind of staying on track, but in the way that they've defined, using their own creativity. It's risky.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's empowering and equipping, with the left and right limits, as we used to say in the military.
Yeah, correct.
Here's your left and right limits, and here's the timeline, and everything else in between you come up with.
Yeah.
And give them that opportunity to succeed and or fail.
And lots of people will hear something like this and say, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you're just going to give it to somebody and sit back. And man, if we could experience it together, you'd experience that this is not a soft and easy process, that you can continue if you feel the need to apply a lot of pressure to someone, or to keep the left and right limits tight if you need to. Let's say it's budget, for example. Like we can't just, there's almost no situation where we can set someone loose to solve a problem with no limits on the amount of money they can spend. Of course, the more money we can spend, the more cool the solution we can get is, right? But we can say, I'm sorry, we only have $100. No, 101, I can't do, right? Go back, work it a little bit harder, right? And that's painful. But to someone who criticized what we just said and say, hey, that's never going to work in the real world because you just let someone do whatever they feel like. That's not really how it plays out. But you do want to allow that person to use their entire being instead of you trying to do it for them and kind of getting in the way.
Yeah, 100%. No, exactly. They do need to know what are the resources. Are there any resources? What are those resources? What are what are my left and right limits?
Time. You cannot spend a year doing it. We have to have it in 3 weeks. I'm sorry. Right. Yes, it is impossible. I'm sorry. If we don't have it in 3 weeks, these are the consequences. We can't afford those consequences.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is one of my first entrepreneurial endeavors. I just got out of the military and met, this very successful doctor and this very successful real estate developer and entrepreneur. And they're like, okay, no, but we want you, now that you're out of the military, we want you, okay, you were, a leader in the military. So, and I had no real prior experience to entrepreneurship or business or anything, literally just got out of the military. And this guy's like, okay, I want you to put together an aquatic fitness center. I want you to put together an aquatic fitness center. And so, I'm thinking, okay, sweet, aquatic fitness center. My world is the military, and I'm like, okay, aquatic fitness center, I'm like, okay, so can we narrow the scope just a little bit here? He's like, okay, so I want a fitness center on there. And there's a pool. So he bought this pool, this big giant pool on a couple acres. And he's like, okay, so I want a fitness center in there. and I want swim lessons. I want bam. I want this whole thing. I want palm trees. I want all this stuff. And so, and it really annoys me when you ask questions. So don't ask me any questions. And I'm like, and I am the question gangster, right? I am a question machine. And so I'm like, okay. And we had like just met, like literally maybe a week or two into our relationship here. And I said, okay, when, you mind just, I got one question. When would you like this? Because I'm thinking I got a year or two, I got 6 months to a year, 2 years. He's like, you've got 90 days. Like, woo, awesome. This is going to be amazing sauce. So he gave me, almost really no left and right limits, right? He just said, it was like Abraham, I feel like Ranger Abraham in the Bible, you know what I mean? Like, go. Okay, God, but like direction, distance, my checkpoints, nope, move out, draw fire, bro. And while it tremendously, I felt empowered, I did not feel very equipped.
Yeah.
And so anyway, and we made it happen. Shockingly, we made it happen. But it was both Kathy and I, and it was like 18-hour days for 90 days straight. I mean, it was straight insanity. So there are scenarios where, and it is, I think that it's a balance. I think it's a balance
of
empowering and equipping, but not, like you said, not so much equipping that my left and right limits are like a hallway that's 2 feet wide and I have to like squeeze through, right? Because that can be suffocating. But that's part of the art of leadership, right? Is knowing what is that massage between empowering and my left and right limits and the equipping.
And the other thing that can happen is that person who requires so much equipping and asking so many questions that you are actually doing it yourself. Like, okay, so we've spent 8 hours of every day of the 3 weeks I gave you to do it with you in my office asking me how it needs to be done. I didn't need you.
That's another great point.
Right. So that can happen. But
100%.
Yeah.
Bro, I cannot thank you enough, man. All the skinny and the wisdom and the transparency and the vulnerability that you shared. I absolutely appreciate that. And I know this is going to add value to a lot of people. Bro.
Yeah, that would be great. It's been great. And I hope it does. I hope, I've been through a lot of struggles. We didn't even really touch on them. And I always hope that those struggles can help other people, right? If not, I really don't believe that they can prevent other people's struggles, but can I encourage you in your struggles that I struggled, other people have struggled, and it works. It can work out. It probably will work out. It might not be the beauty that you think it's going to be, but it will be beautiful.
Love it. That's awesome. Thank you so much, brother. I totally appreciate you. And we are absolutely going to do another episode at some point in the future.
Cool. Great. Yeah, man. It's great to connect with you.